riders were right up against the wall, the wall that keeps you from going over the edge of the bridge. And my recollection is that wall was not very high. So I remember looking over thinking, like, God, if someone crashes, it's a long way down.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. This is our Tour de France preview episode. The tour starts tomorrow, because it's Canada Day, so that's a good day to start the Tour of France. Joining me today is web editor Matt Hansen. Matt, good to have you back.
I'm just happy to be here.
You're happy to be here. Yeah, we missed you last episode. I missed you.
I was busy.
Yeah, I know you're very busy. And also joining us is Michael Berry. Welcome back to the podcast, Michael Berry.
Happy to be here as well.
Now, Michael doesn't really need an introduction, but he gets one. He's a former pro roadie. He now runs Mariposa Bicycles with his wife, Dee Dee. And he's pretty darn familiar with the roads of France. So we are going to be leaning on him for some expert knowledge. This is the 109th Tour de France. It's the big one. It's the big event of the year. 3,328 kilometers. There's 19.4 kilometers of cobbles. There's 6 flat stages, 7 hilly ones, 6 mountain stages. All your favorite climbs are there, or many of your favorite climbs are there. And we have a lot to talk about. Oh, it's a clockwise year. Sometimes it goes counterclockwise, the tour. Sometimes it goes clockwise. So we go from the north to the Alps, to the Pyrenees, to Paris. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get right into our Tour de France preview. Let us start, because this is Canadian Cycling Magazine. Let's start with the Canucks. We have a pretty good batch of Canucks, right, Matt, showing up this year. And by pretty big, pretty good, we mean 3.
Yeah, not bad,
Wait, isn't that the most that have ever raced the tour in one go?
I think it's never been more than 3. Last year was 3 as well. I don't think there's ever been 4. There was definitely a drought. After Duchesne was there in 2016, there was no one in 17 and 18. And then Hugo Hull broke the drought in 19. It's a good crop of riders. And like I said, Antoine Duchesne was there in 2016, and he's finally back for his second tour. How does his team, Matt, look to you?
Well, I think the thing is they're a French team as well, racing in Tour de France, so it's sort of always something special what's happening with the French teams. I think it's cool also that he's back racing the Tour, because I think he's always kind of excelled on his adopted country, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And it must be super tough and competitive for, a Canadian to get in on a French. He's on a French team. He's a French Canadian, but still getting to the Tour, the biggest event of the year, has got to be a tough thing to do.
I think it reflects on his qualities as a bike racer.
Definitely.
Generally, I would say Canadians adapt pretty well in different cultures and in different teams, and for the most part. But it's always, a bit of an uphill battle for Canadians when they're racing in Europe and just trying to make it on teams and get starts. But it's definitely a reflection of his qualities as a rider.
And to race on a French team in the Tour is like, playing for the Leafs or something in the Stanley Cup, which of course is another story, but that must be pretty special, I guess.
I think that might be a strained analogy, but whatever. He'll be riding in support of David Gaudu. Michael, what you said about Canadians being adaptable, I feel that applies to Hugo Hull. He was a really clutch rider when he was on Astana. Now he's on his new team, Israel Premier Tech, and he's back at the Tour, 4th time in a row. He's still riding with longtime teammate Jakob Fuglsang. How do I say that?
Close. Fuglsang. It means bird, song of the bird.
We will get more into Matt Hansen and his expertise as our Toronto-based Denmark bureau chief. But back to Uhl, he'll also be riding in support of Michael Woods, who's going to be back at the Tour this year. Both Fuglsang and Woods they worked really well together at the American Tour Classique Alpes Maritimes. They did a 1-2 there. And that's been the plan since they knew they were going to be racing on the team, I think, together, to be like a 1-2 punch at these races. We've seen it work once really well. How do you think that can play out in France, Michael?
It's always good to have two climbers, especially, the big thing for teams going into the Tour this year is like Pogačar has been so dominant the last couple of years. So the more riders they have to attack him and just try and break things up, and the more options they have for winning stages or placing in the top 10, the better off they'll be. And especially when you look at how challenging the first week of the race will be. The first week of the Tour is always chaotic, and quite often teams will lose one or two riders due to crashes, or just, they'll lose a GC rider, or a GC rider may lose a lot of time. So the more options you have, the better off you'll be.
But not just that, Michael. Like, tell us how, we all see it in TV, how frenetic and chaotic. Everyone's hungry for a yellow jersey. Everyone's nervous. Everyone's anxious. Everyone wants to win a stage. Everyone's preparing for this. Is the first week as crazy as it looks? Like, is it just...
Yeah, it's crazy. Some of the most nerve-wracking racing, or the most nerve-wracking racing that I've done, that I did in my career, was the first couple days of the Tour de France or the Giro d'Italia. But the Tour is something even more different, because the stakes are so high, and every rider wants to be in the front. The crowds are big. The director is constantly yelling at the riders to, over the radios, to be in the front. So everybody's fighting for every inch. No one wants to lose time. And then as soon as the peloton hits the mountains, things start to mellow out a little bit. But it's definitely extremely intense. And then there are always difficulties or sections in those first stages where you have crosswinds or cobbles, or what was it that in 1999 they went over the Passage de Gois, which was a causeway on the west of France, and many of the top contenders for the yellow jersey crashed out and either were out of the race or lost time for the general classification. So it's an intense section of the race, and I think like most of the teams just want to get through unscathed and into the mountains, or most of the GC riders anyways.
And even losing a 30 seconds or a minute, or having a crash early on, meaning you can't sleep properly, or you can't recover as well. That could be your Tour right there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And we saw it last year with Roglic when he crashed a couple of times, and then he couldn't recover, and he was on some of the best form of his life, and he had to go home. So I'd say it's really difficult to sleep, especially when you're staying in hotel rooms that sometimes don't have air conditioning or whatever, and you're rolling around on road rash in bed at night. It's not fun. And then you've got to contend the next day race with like the fittest guys in the world over difficult terrain. So it's your body doesn't have a lot of chance to recover.
I want to get into some of the potential pitfalls in the early stages of the Tour in a second, because we've identified a few of them. But I still want to stick with our Canucks for just a little bit longer. Michael, can you tell me more about the types of duties that riders like Uhl and Duchesne will have? Like Woods, we know, or we suspect, he'll be chasing, some of the climbing things, the inclines of the Tour. But what are the duties that Duchesne and Uhl will be given through most of the 21 stages?
I would imagine they'll be working mostly as domestiques, and so to get the leaders through the race in the best position as possible, as well fed as possible. And then when they do have the opportunities, because they, if their leaders, aren't always performing as expected or whatever, they can have the opportunity to go on breakaways and then maybe go for stage wins themselves. So especially on the transitional days between the mountains and the sprint stages, those guys will have extremely important roles, especially in that first week when the race is nervous. So they'll always be around their leaders, keeping them out of trouble, trying to keep them in the best position possible. And then also going back to the car and getting water or food or their rain jackets or whatever the leaders may need. they'll have some of the toughest jobs in the race. And then, of course, when there are breakaways, if their teams aren't represented in those breakaways, they'll be on the front in the wind.
Does it ever get easier for them, or like do their duties lighten near the end of the tour, or does it just all depend on how their leader is doing?
It really depends on how their leaders are doing. But, if their leaders aren't performing as expected, their jobs don't necessarily get easier because the expectation is that they'll get in breakaways and still be representing the team at the front of the race, which is obviously equally as hard or harder.
One rider who is a teammate of Woods and Uhl, who's not there this year, is Guillaume Boivin. He made his debut last year. He's close, though. He's on reserve. I believe he's first reserve for the Tour. Matt, you and I were talking about that can be a pretty good position, but it can also be a kind of hectic position because we were talking about Christian Meyer, who got the call up in 2014.
Well, I mean, I think that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, Michael, too, is how, what it's like. I'm sure there have been times that the last second someone's sick or injured and they've said, oh, Michael, you got to show up to this race. And you might be in the middle of a training block or just not ready to go to a race. What's that like, just having to get in a plane and show up at a race because, someone's sick or injured? That must kind of suck.
It doesn't always. I mean, if you're keen to do the race, sometimes it's a blessing or something you're really looking forward to. But it is difficult to completely change gears in your mindset and I've been called out on training rides. I was, just out in the middle of the countryside and my cell phone rang and the team said, okay, go home. You got to get on a plane in 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever it was and fly up to wherever, somewhere in northern Belgium or something like that to race. So it happened quite a lot. And I think most of the riders, if you're on the reserve list, you're prepared, especially if you're first reserve, prepared to go. Boivin, he was racing in Edmonton last week, so I'm not really sure where he is, but I would hope the team has him back in Europe already.
Well, that's what I was saying to Matthew today, is that you'd think that he would be, you don't want to fly to Denmark from Montreal or something like that on a Thursday, although Christian Meyer did, you were saying, Matthew, from Vancouver that year. But at the same time, I would imagine with COVID now, I mean, they were saying that they had multiple reserves now because of the fact that someone might get sick on Wednesday or Thursday and they'll be down a rider. So it's even kind of more different than when you race, because it's not just like a guy crashes out or gets a cold overnight with COVID stuff, like with Tour of Switzerland. All these guys are getting sick. It must be a stressful time to be a cyclist and also to be in team management.
Yeah, it's really difficult for the for both team management and the cyclists. It'll be interesting to see if the teams go back into creating their own bubbles. I would imagine they will, just so that they can stay as healthy as possible.
Well, if I was Pogacar, I'd be walking around in a scuba suit right now. Not talking to. I'd be Bubble Boy right now, or any of these favorites.
It's crazy when you think about how much they've invested in the race, like training, time, everything, money as well, and it makes sense to just stay in a bubble as much as possible and not, especially around the media and the after the race and all the fans and that sort of thing, because it's pretty easy to catch it and be out of the race in a couple days later.
Well, I mean, imagine also just in the old days before COVID, just as an athlete, how careful you were not to shake too many hands or be around sick people and turn off the air conditioning, whatever, all those things, that kind of stuff that they would always beat down your throat. And now it's even easier to get sick, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was pretty hard to stay healthy a lot of times in the Grand Tours, especially if one guy on the team got sick, then it spread through the teams really quickly.
I want to now look at Denmark. The first 3 stages are in that country. As I joked earlier, Matt Hansen, you are our Denmark bureau chief. You can say Mads Pedersen's name properly. Pedersen's name.
Yeah, I can. Mads Pedersen. But, I've raced quite a bit in Denmark too, but so has Michael's done much bigger races. And Michael, so you did the Worlds in 2011 in Copenhagen. You did the Tour of Denmark several times, and you had a 6th in one of them, which you forgot, but well done. And then you also did the race you were talking about, is the Grand Prix Midtbank, I think, which is sort of the Paris-Roubaix of Denmark, which you also were up there in. So you've done quite a bit of racing in Denmark, and of course, you know that there's not a lot of hills there. There's some little bumps on the mainland, but not much. But the wind is going to be a huge factor.
Yeah, yeah. The wind and the bridge.
Yeah. So the one year you did that, you went the opposite. You went west to east, but I mean it's all the same thing. I mean it's like 18 kilometers long. That's exposed bridge.
Actually, Matt, tell us more about that bridge because you've written a story for the website. Could a bridge determine this year's Tour de France winner?
I mean, like Michael said, it's sort of similar to the Passage de Gois in 1999, except, I mean, the Passage de Gois is like a causeway, right? So it's basically sea level. And I mean, it's nuts. I don't think they'd ever have a race there now because it looks pretty sketchy, right? Like the water was going over the causeway and everyone wiped out. But on the same way, I mean, it's completely exposed. Like I was saying, you can't. My dad would drive it, and he said he was white knuckle driving this thing, and they don't allow transport trucks that aren't loaded on some days because they're going to blow over. So, I mean, just thinking about it makes me nervous. I mean, it's cool they're doing it, obviously, but
Cool for the spectators.
yeah. It basically goes in Denmark is composed of 2 islands and a mainland, and so this goes from the island where Copenhagen is to the middle island. So Michael would have done it going west to east because he must have finished in Copenhagen. We did the Tour of Denmark that year. But Michael, what was that like? Was it just?
It was nerve-wracking. Like, I mean, definitely a memorable experience, not for great reasons, but the peloton, because the wind is often really strong as you cross the bridge, the peloton split into echelons. And when the peloton splits into echelons, every rider is fighting for every inch of road. Riders were right up against the wall, the wall that keeps you from going over the edge of the bridge. And my recollection is that wall was not very high. So I remember looking over, thinking, like, God, if someone crashes, it's a long way down. But maybe it is higher now.
But I think the bridge itself was only maybe 4 lanes wide. It's not a really super wide bridge.
It's not huge. No, not at all. Yeah, it's the peloton split into echelons pretty quickly. In the early stages, when there are sections of the race that there's going to be crosswind, or like I said before, cobbles, or this bridge, the peloton gets extremely nervous running into those sections. So quite often, from a crash standpoint or a nervousness in the bunch and even intensity of effort, the hardest part of those sections is the run up into them.
Because everyone wants to get positioned well, kind of thing. And
yeah, exactly. Everybody's fighting to be at the front, and you have like 200 riders who all want to be in the first 20. I remember like my power files in Paris-Roubaix, or whenever there were cobble sections, the higher power numbers were like in the run in to the sectors. But quite often, like, my job was to position the leaders for those sections. So you're basically doing like, a field sprint lead out into the section of cobbles to put them in the front. And then the peloton will like ease off a little bit once they hit the cobbles and everything's, because everybody's in position. And it's like harder to move up, obviously. So it's similar when they'll go over the bridge. I'm sure it'll be complete chaos for, probably 20K, 15, 20K before they even get to the bridge. Riders will be already fighting for position. The other thing that's interesting about that stage is that the finish is like right after. So not only are they fighting for position to get over the bridge safely and avoiding like time splits, but there's also they'll be sprinting for the finish line soon after. It's going to be like, from a television perspective, it's going to be pretty fun to watch. But I'm glad I'm not racing.
And that's stage 2. Like, that's only the second day of racing. And that, yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a little bonkers. Another stage that comes early on with potential pitfalls, or which could have a great effect on some riders, is stage 5. It's the cobbled stage. It ends in Arenberg Port de Hainaut. Michael, you were there in 2010. Parts of this stage were slightly similar to 2014, and that's where Chris Froome, he actually hurt his wrist the day before, but he went down on it, and that cost him his 2014 race. Jakob Fuglsang was actually second on that stage. He does okay on cobbles. But what can you tell us about these cobbles? These aren't the Roubaix cobbles, are they, Michael?
No, there are some new sectors that haven't been used in Paris-Roubaix. So I know before the race, a lot of the teams were out there checking them out, doing some reconnaissance around the area to look to see how bad the cobbles were and how the run-ins were to the different sections, which is always important on stages like this, just to have some your bearings so that like say there's a water tower on the side, that's where you got to be in position before you hit the cobbles, or a certain a yellow house or something like that. You pick up these points, and then where you need to be at that point of the race, or where you need to be in the peloton at that point of the race. And then obviously also just seeing the different lines and how bad the cobbles are and how long the sections are as well. So there's always a lot of planning involved with stages like that. It's kind of interesting too, quite often, like the top contenders for the overall classification are like quite often a number of them are in the front on those cobble stages. So just because they're fit and their teams are working really hard to place them at the front of the race. It's kind of interesting to see some, skinnier climber guys at the front hammering over the cobblestones.
Then they would never normally do a race like Paris-Roubaix.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually rode with Jakob Fuglsang on some cobbles. This was at a bike launch. And to say I rode with him is we started at the same spot together. And then we were all trying this new bike that was launching that year. And he said that, he did that stage of the tour and he liked it and he wouldn't mind trying more. But just because of, the type of rider he is, no one's going to send him to Roubaix. But he went over those things just fine, it seemed, from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, he would be pretty accustomed to riding on them just from having done races as an amateur. And even there are a number of pro races that do go over the cobbled zones. But racing Paris-Roubaix on them is a different thing. And you're risking a lot. He could risk his whole season in a crash in Paris-Roubaix. So it makes sense for those guys not to roll the dice.
Do you think it's good, Michael, that they have these kind of cobble stages in the Tour de France? Like, do you think it's, like, what's your opinion on having these kind of sketchy stages?
It's part of the race. I mean, from a rider's perspective, it's always, it just makes the race more nervous and dangerous. But at the same time, cycling is a show. You're putting on a show for the public, right, in a big way. So it draws the crowds, and I'm sure the television audience will be as big or as large on the cobbled stages as it will in the mountain stages. So it does have its place. And historically, the cobbles were always in, there early on. Obviously, there were a lot of cobbled sections in the tours, and so I do think it has its place. It's part of the race.
I should mention that we are recording this on the Monday before the tour, which starts Friday. And we were kind of joking earlier about, or not joking, we were musing earlier about Boivin's chances of getting there. He could be there right now because so much could change in a few days. And news that we're finding out today is that Mark Cavendish will not be attending the tour, which means he will not be trying to beat Eddie Merckx's record. He's tied it with 34 stage wins, but alas, we won't see him going to do 35, at least not this year. Michael, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is Patrick Lefevre in his rights to just say, no, I've got, a better sprinter over here, I'm going with him? Or is there an argument for sending Cav to the tour?
Well, I'm biased. I'm a Cav fan. And his performance at the national championships was phenomenal. And he didn't win the race in a field sprint, but he won it impressively just based on his strength and his attacking. And it was a hilly course. So he clearly has really, really good fitness right now. And I would say, one Cav victory, if he breaks the record, that might be more valuable than a number of stage wins by any other rider on the team. So, I mean, they're going with Jakobsen, and that's going to be their sprinter. But if I was in Lefebvre's shoes right now, I would definitely take Cav. And if anything, he could get his stage win, and then he could also help out Jakobsen in the sprints. I mean, obviously, there's no other sprinter in the history of the sport as experienced and as successful as Cav. So it's a real shame, I think, that they didn't take him. And, hopefully he gets a shot next year before he decides maybe to retire. So, yeah, I think it's a shame that he didn't get selected. Last year it was a fantastic story, and it really captured the public and the interests of the public and the fans. So it's too bad not to see him there this year.
He's 37 now, 38 next year. It might even be harder to get on the roster. I don't know.
Like Valverde, he's not racing this year, but he's done every other race.
Sure.
You have guys racing later and also guys winning, younger than ever as well. So all the rules of the past are no longer in place. It's pretty interesting.
David Rebellin will probably be doing the tour next year, the way things are going.
Yeah. He might make a comeback.
I have a section here in my notes called Geezers. And, Philippe Gilbert will turn 40 at the tour. But he has said this is his last season. And fun fact, Israel Premier Tech already has 3 in the top 10. That's 3 of the riders who are in the top 10 of 8 in the age group. Daryl Impey, Jakob Fuglsang, and Chris Froome.
I think we forgot about maybe another Canadian in the tour, of Bowers, their director.
Oh, we did forget another Canadian. That's right. Yeah, and he will be in the team car for them on the very Canadian Israel Premier Tech team. And some Canadians we didn't mention. One of my dark horse kind of hopes was that Rafael Paracella on B&B Hotels KTM was going to make it, but he's 19 and he's on a French team, so it'd be tough for him. He was racing nationals anyway, so I don't even think he's on the reserve. That'd be my guess. But I did have my fingers crossed about him.
It's really it's amazing that there are so many Canadians at racing at a high level now. And I mean, as you said, Israel is more or less, I would consider it a Canadian team, Israel Premier Tech. And the fact that there are so many Canadians racing overseas, it's really notable. And it's definitely looks good for the future of Canadian cycling at the highest level.
Yeah, with Premier Tech, which is a Quebec-based company, being the co-title sponsor, and Sylvain Adams, the Montrealer, now living in Israel, who's he's quite open that he has I guess a dual passport when it comes to his loyalties. I think he would say Israel first, but Canada pretty darn close second. And the team makeup, I think, reflects his dual nationalities that are at play there.
I mean, I think it's great when you see. Of course, he's lost it now. Although we do have a guy racing in Europe with the national championship jersey. But last year when Bovin was in Paris-Roubaix wearing the Maple Leaf jersey, I mean it's great to see the jersey represented in Europe. I think that's just, as a Canadian, exciting. Like all those years, in the old days before they had a pro championship in Europe or for Canadians, like imagine Bauer in the old days, racing on 7-Eleven or La Vie Claire wearing that jersey. It would have been pretty rad.
It would have, yeah.
And it's a pretty tough thing to manage. Like, if I remember correctly, Tuft had it the TT jersey in, I think it was 2014. But like, you have to come over to Canada, win it, and then book it back to France. Like, that's just not ideal preparation for the tour.
No, it isn't. I think the nationals have only been, Canadian nationals have only been in June, maybe in the last, sort of over the last 10 years. Before, they were always different times of the year, 10, 15 years, I guess. So it was pretty hard.
Which makes sense. I mean, the thing is that if a guy is going to do the Tour de France, he's not going to come back to Edmonton, a week before and screw up his.
Sorry, Edmonton.
Or anywhere in Canada, rather, and get jet lag and then swing it back to your. And I'm sure, Michael, your team wouldn't allow you. They're like, no, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. If I was, at all was in a position to maybe go to the tour, I wasn't allowed to fly back to Canada.
And that's why I think, if I know Canada's trying to make their championships in line with Europe and all the other countries, but in a practical sense, if you want to have your pro star wearing the jersey in Europe or whatever, it really doesn't make sense. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yep. Back to the tour.
Back to the tour.
Back to the tour. Let us talk some of the tour contenders. The big one, obviously, is Tadej Pogačar. He's won the Tour of Slovenia, Tirreno Adriatico, Strade Bianche, and the UAE Tour. That's this year. And he's going for his third tour in a row.
He's won 8 out of the 9 stage races he's ridden. Van Aert's winning stats are pretty impressive as well. There's Jumbo-Visma United Arab Emirates are definitely going to be the two dominant teams.
They really are. And I'm wondering, Matt, have you seen any sort of cracks in Tadej Pogacar this year? Anything that would indicate that maybe he can be beaten?
I mean, the only thing I think Jumbo Visma with like Michael was saying with the numbers, right? I mean, I think that's the only way that you could kind of double team him. But I mean, I don't know, Michael. What do you think? Like he can attack downhills, uphills, sideways, everything.
He's struggled in the heat a little bit in the past, so that might be one weakness. But struggled is relative. He's still, even when he's struggling, he's better than most riders. But they also, UAE has reinforced their team this year. So I think on paper, they have a stronger team than they did before. But, Jumbo Visma with Matt, say it, pronounce it, Vingegaard.
Vingagor. It means the Garden of Wings or something, or Farm of Wings.
So, I mean, you look at their team and it's really remarkable. Kreisweg was riding extremely well in the last races he's done recently. His form's really good. Roglic was dominant in the Dauphiné. Van Aert dominant as well. They definitely have the strongest team and they have a lot of firepower. So they're just gonna have to attack him as much as possible. Attack Pogacar as much as possible. And Ineos is in a similar position where Geraint Thomas, he just won the Tour de Suisse and is obviously on really good form. Danny Martinez was unbelievable at the Giro last year, and he's been riding well this year. Adam Yates as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if Filippo Ganna wins the prologue. And they have a strong team that, in the mountains with Martinez, Thomas, and Yates, they can attack Pogacar as well. If anybody wants to beat him, they've got to be creative and just attack nonstop, because if they wait, he's going to beat them.
I don't even know if it's actually technically. What's the rule for a prologue? Is it 8K or 9 or something? There's some weird rule.
Yeah. It's more of a time trial. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, 13K. So that's sizable.
Yeah, there'll be some gaps, and there are a lot of corners as well. So it's a technical time trial. I actually was chatting with my son about this earlier, and I bet on Van Aert winning. I think he was going with Ganna or Bissinger. So, but yeah, it's or no, actually no, he said Van der Poel in the end, I think. So it'll be an exciting race.
Oh, well, with money and bragging rights in your household on the line, it's funny that you pick Van Aert, because you could also pick him, as we've seen, to win on the Champs-Élysées on the last day.
Or in the Pyrenees.
Yeah, dude can win anywhere. I think for sheer, oh my God, are you kidding me results, it's Jumbo Visma this year. Do you remember way back at Paris-Nice when they had the 1-2-3 finish? And then at the Dauphiné, Vingegaard, and Roglic were 1-2 on the final stage. Matt, who do you think looked stronger in that stage where they finished hand in hand, a la Eno and Le Monde?
I mean, I don't know. It's so hard to say, right? Because I feel like the level is so close right now. And Michael, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like everyone's so close that, from one day to the next, to say who's strongest, it's not like there are these overwhelming, guys who just dominate. I mean, like the level between number one, number two, number three is so close. It could variate, between one week to the next. So, I mean, the tour is 3 weeks long, and obviously the biggest race of the year, but all it takes, like Michael was saying, is one kind of crappy day, one off day, one crash, one whatever, and then you're 5% less. So,
yeah, that's the gaps between the top riders they're so minimal, and on that team, both of those guys were really dominant in the hills in the Dauphiné. So it's hard to say who will be better. A lot of it's going to come down to who's getting the best sleep, who stays healthy, who doesn't crash, all that stuff, and then those small differences add up at the end of the race. But I remember I had one teammate who had raced in Italy for a pro team, and every night he would go to bed an hour later, or no, he would wake up an hour earlier than his roommate. And towards the end of the race, his roommate said, "Hey, look, I've been sleeping in an hour longer. By the end of this it was the Giro they were at. By the end of the Giro, I'll have slept an extra day." And my teammate never thought, like the guy who I was friends, he never thought of it, and it was actually Matt White, who's now the director of like exchange, but he never thought about it in those terms. And you think about that, and so like how much those little things, like an extra half hour sleep or an hour sleep, make at the end of the difference they make at the end of the race. So that's why you see the riders just as quickly as possible after the finish getting into the team buses to go to the hotels, and they're immediately resting because it always adds up in a Grand Tour. So the stuff that you can get away with in like a week-long race or a couple day stage race in a Grand Tour, it really you pay for it at the end.
Which is what makes it so impressive, too, when you look at the guys who are leading, all the stuff they had to deal with after a stage. If you finish the stage in 100th, go to the bus, you go to the hotel, you get your massage, you go to bed, you eat all that stuff. But if you have a yellow jersey, you've got to do a press conference, you've got to talk to people, you got to do all this crap, and it's just one more stress on top of the stress of keeping a yellow jersey.
Yeah, for sure it is. And sometimes, like, riders, they'll not want to take the yellow jersey early. Riders who have the potential to win the overall, they'll avoid taking the jersey early for that reason. There are definitely like many more hours of work at the end of the day, and it's even more complicated when you're on the top of a mountain at the for the stage finish. So the tour is definitely like completely different than even the Giro or the Vuelta, because it feels like there's just something going on all the time, and the hotels are chaotic. There's just people around nonstop, and so it's really important to get as much rest as possible when you can get it. When I did it, it felt like the quietest place was when we were going to the start on the bus in the morning or after the race. It was because there's just like chaos around all the time.
So the message here is, kids, don't try and get the yellow jersey. Just don't try.
Or if you have the yellow jersey and you're at a press conference and you have to stand, sit. And if you can sit at that press conference, then lie down, or however that saying goes.
That's catchy.
Yeah. I think I need to workshop that a bit more. I want to turn our attention to Michael Woods. Last year, he spent a day in the polka dot jersey. He's probably under some pressure, either internally, externally, and by externally, I mean from Canadian fans. It would be great to see a stage win, more polka dots. What do we think is Michael Woods' best tour this year?
I mean, I think the polka dot jersey is cool, but then I guess, and Michael, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but you've also got to be on guard for all the intermediate sprints for the mountains. It's not like you're even thinking about winning a stage, which is of course fantastic. But you're basically every day you're hamstrung by these, the mountain sprints, or whatever day there are points to be got. So either or is great, but winning a stage seems like you're winning the Super Bowl. So
yeah, I would agree with that. It's and this year that competition will be even more competitive, because I know a number of riders have realized they can't compete for the overall, or they'll struggle to compete for the overall. Guys who are really good climbers, and so they're going to go for the King of the Mountains and stages. So I would imagine just overall the racing is going to be really aggressive this year. As for Mike Woods, I would say that stage wins, and definitely like he showed the last couple of years that he has the legs to win the polka dot jersey, and he's always up there on the climbs. And so just as long as he struggled a little bit on the descents, that was his kind of, and last year it seemed like his descending wasn't quite as good, and obviously to make it consistently in the front over numerous mountains, you have to descend, I think, top 10 and a stage win, or a KOM jersey and a stage win or two would be fantastic. That team is under pressure as well now, right, to get some points too to stay in the Pro Tour. So I'm sure he's under a lot of pressure, but I hope he can. He definitely has some good fitness now, and hopefully he can have a great race.
One stage I'm wondering about for him. Now, Christian Prudhomme, the director of the race, has said this is a stage for punchers. It's stage 8, and it features a new climb for the tour into Lausanne. It's called Côte de Stade Olympique. And it's only like 4.5% grade, but it's got ramps of 12%. I feel it's a nice one, like finishing kicker that possibly that could be one for Woods as a stage win?
There are a number of he's one of the best riders in the world, so he could kind of win on most terrain where there's that goes up and down. So I wouldn't count him out anywhere if he can make it through the first week in good shape. I would imagine he'll be in the front in a lot of those stages. And then, that early on, it's harder to get in breakaways or earlier on in the race, but towards the end of the race, if he isn't in contention for the overall, he has, a really good shot in getting in some breakaways in the Pyrenees and winning stages in the Pyrenees.
Mm-hmm. And you make a good point. It doesn't always have to be uphill for him to win. He can sometimes after a descent, he has shown himself to be a real savvy rider as well.
Michael, Matthew and I haven't done the Tour de France, and we're probably not going to do it anytime soon. But you have. What's it like riding to Paris? I mean, it's everyone's dream, and I know it must be an emotional thing. But what's it like when you see the finish?
It is. It was, to use a cliche, a dream come true for sure. The ambiance before the start's pretty relaxed, and everybody's just happy to be done. Towards the end of the race, obviously, you're still you got to cross the finish line on the Champs-Élysées to actually finish the Tour, and so they're not completely relaxed at the start, but it's quite jovial, and as the peloton rolls out. But then when you get towards Paris and you see the Eiffel Tower, and when I was riding in, it was really emotional, actually, for me. It had been a goal since I was a young kid, and I'd visited Paris with my dad when I was 8 years old, and we had ridden around on our bikes then, and so it was really emotional. And then I had maybe like 3 or 4 minutes to just kind of reflect on my life racing a bike, and also just the emotion of, my parents were there at the finish, my family was there. That was really something special, and one of the, I guess, best memories I have of my racing career in many ways. That relaxation or that reflection was brief, and then pretty soon after we were racing full on up and down the Champs-Élysées, which is tough. It's not easy going up and down there, especially on the cobbles. So it's but the crowds are massive and emotions are high in the peloton. So overall, it's such a fantastic way to finish any bike race.
And also, you're fitter than ever. I mean, that's a crazy part, is that you're coming to this finish for 3 weeks, and everyone in the peloton is just, so fast, right? After this tough racing. I mean, you're tired, but you're still fast. I remember one thing Dee Dee said to me years ago was that she saw, I guess she must have been in T-Mobile, and she saw the T-Mobile guys a day or two after the Tour, and she said they were just walking around like zombies. I mean, they were super fit, but they're just, like you're just battered, from 3 weeks of racing this tough race.
Yeah. You are. When after the Tour, I went to Euro Disney with the kids. I was like, I think it was like 2 days after the Tour. It was pretty rough trying to walk around Euro Disney in the crowds. But yeah, it's you definitely are extremely fit. It takes like roughly 2 weeks to recover properly from a Grand Tour, and then you're like, if you stay healthy and don't overdo it after the race, you'll have a whole other level of fitness.
Well, gentlemen, that was a great chat about the Tour. I'm excited. Michael, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's nice chatting with you guys.
Yeah. And, the Tour starts tomorrow on Canada Day. So, like any cycling fan in Canada, spend your Canada Day watching the Tour de France, which is actually in Denmark. That's very international.
We've got some lessons to do, Matthew. We'll do some Danish lessons tomorrow.
Yes, I should practice my pronunciation. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Michael. We'll talk to you guys later. And that's the episode. Thanks again to Michael and Matt, and also thanks to web editor Terry McCall who helped out. This episode is produced by Adam Killick. He composed the music too. Thanks to Ontario Creates for its support, and thank you for listening. Please rate and review the show. Ride safely, and I'll talk to you later.